The morning fog rolled thick across Henderson Bay as Ray Mitchell guided his weathered fishing boat through the choppy waters. At 52, with calloused hands and salt-weathered skin, Ray had spent more than 3 decades making his living from the sea. This Thursday morning seemed no different from countless others until a distant cry cut through the mist. If you love your family and want to listen to amazing and shocking stories, click on subscribe and avoid 20 years of bad luck in your life. Through the dense fog, Ray spotted a capsized luxury speedboat about 200 yards away. Without hesitation, he turned his vessel toward the accident. As he drew closer, he could make out a man struggling in the water, clearly in distress. The man's expensive suit, now waterlogged, was weighing him down as he fought against the current. Ray positioned his boat alongside the struggling figure and threw out a life preserver. The man grabbed it weakly, his strength nearly depleted. With practiced movements, Ray hauled him aboard, noting the man's pale complexion and blue-tinged lips. The rescued man collapsed on the deck, coughing up seawater. James Turner, the man managed between coughs, running a hand through his silver-streaked hair. "I can't thank you enough." Ray recognized the name immediately. James Turner was one of the wealthiest businessmen on the coast, known for his shipping empire and real estate investments. Ray offered him a thermal blanket and some hot coffee from his thermos while radioing the Coast Guard about the accident. "The throttle stuck," James explained, his breathing steadying. "Then the steering locked up. Never had anything like that happen before." He paused, studying Ray with interest. "You handled that rescue like a professional." "Been fishing these waters since I was a kid," Ray replied simply, steering them toward the marina. "You learn a thing or two." 2 days later, Ray received an unexpected call from Turner's office, inviting him for a day trip on the businessman's private yacht, the Aurora. Ray initially wanted to decline. He had fishing quotas to meet, and luxury yachts weren't his scene. But his daughter Sarah's voice echoed in his mind, reminding him about her college dreams and their mounting bills. The Aurora was unlike anything Ray had ever seen up close. A 120-foot masterpiece of marine engineering worth more money than he'd earned in several lifetimes. James greeted him warmly, showing him around the vessel with genuine enthusiasm. They spent hours talking about the sea, boats, and life's unexpected turns. "You know, Ray," James said, as they stood on the upper deck, watching the sunset, "I've been thinking, I need someone with your experience and instincts on board. Someone who knows these waters and can handle themselves in a crisis." He named a salary that made Ray's head spin. "What do you say?" Ray gripped the polished railing, his mind racing. The money would solve so many problems. Sarah's college fund, the mortgage, his wife's medical bills. But something about leaving his simple life behind made him uneasy. He looked at his reflection in the yacht's spotless windows, his worn fishing clothes standing in stark contrast to the luxury surrounding him. "I'll need a few days to think about it," Ray said carefully. James smiled. "Take all the time you need. But remember, opportunities like this don't come along every day." Later that night, after careful consideration and a long discussion with his family, Ray called James to accept the position. As he hung up the phone, he couldn't shake the feeling that his life was about to change in ways he couldn't imagine. He had no idea just how right he was. Ray's first week aboard the Aurora felt like stepping into another world. The yacht's crew treated him with a mixture of curiosity and professional distance, unsure where this newcomer fit in the carefully maintained hierarchy. His small cabin, though luxurious by his standards, was located in the crew quarters, marking him as neither guest nor traditional staff. During his orientation, Ray met Claire Turner, James's wife of 15 years. She was younger than James by at least a decade, with carefully maintained blonde hair and a smile that never quite reached her eyes. "James has told me all about your heroic rescue," she said, touching Ray's arm. "We're so fortunate to have you join us." Something in her tone made Ray uncomfortable, though he couldn't pinpoint why. She moved through the yacht with the confidence of someone who owned every inch of space. But there was an underlying tension in her movements, like a coiled spring waiting to release. The yacht's business center occupied most of the second deck, where James held virtual meetings with his corporate empire. It was here that Ray first encountered Mark Davidson, James's business partner and chief financial officer. Mark was closer to Claire's age, with sharp features and an expensive watch that he constantly adjusted. "Quite a change from a fishing boat, isn't it?" Mark commented during their first meeting, his tone carrying a hint of condescension. James has always had a soft spot for charitable cases. Ray kept his expression neutral, remembering the salary that would put Sarah through college. "I go where I'm needed," he replied simply. The dynamics aboard the Aurora became clearer during their first formal dinner. Ray, included at James's insistence, watched the interaction between the other three. James dominated the conversation with stories about business deals and future plans, while Claire and Mark exchanged glances when they thought no one was looking. During a lull in the conversation, Ray noticed Mark slip Claire a folded note under the table. Her expression changed briefly before she excused herself, claiming a headache. Mark followed suit 10 minutes later, citing work emails that needed attention. That night, unable to sleep, Ray walked the deck. Voices drifted from the business center, where lights spilled from a partially opened door. He recognized Claire and Mark's voices, speaking in urgent whispers. "The policy is ironclad," Mark was saying. "We just need to be patient." Patient. Claire's voice carried an edge. "It's been months of planning. The accident with the speedboats should have." She stopped abruptly, and Ray quickly moved away, his heart pounding. The next morning, Ray observed Claire and James at breakfast. She played the role of devoted wife perfectly, fussing over his coffee and asking about his plans for the day. But now Ray noticed how her attention sharpened. Whenever James mentioned his upcoming business trips or travel plans, Mark appeared mid-morning, immaculately dressed, as always. "James," he said, "we need to discuss the new insurance policies. The underwriters are asking for additional documentation." Ray, organizing safety equipment nearby, saw Claire's quick smile at the mention of insurance. He remembered the whispered conversation from the night before and felt a chill that had nothing to do with the ocean breeze. Later that day, while checking the emergency protocols, Ray discovered that the yacht's safety equipment had recently been inspected by a company he'd never heard of, with documentation that looked superficially correct but lacked standard certification marks. When he tried to look up the company online, he found no trace of its existence. That evening, as Ray sent his daily video message to Sarah, he carefully omitted his growing concerns. Instead, he focused on the positive aspects of his new job, all while making mental notes of every unusual interaction he witnessed. His years at sea had taught him to trust his instincts, and right now, every instinct was telling him that beneath the Aurora's polished surface, dangerous currents were stirring. James seemed oblivious to the undercurrents, trusting his wife and business partner completely. Ray wondered if he should voice his suspicions, but without concrete evidence, he risked sounding paranoid, or worse, ungrateful for the opportunity he'd been given. As he prepared for bed that night, Ray made a decision. He would start documenting everything he observed, no matter how insignificant it might seem. Something was wrong aboard the Aurora, and he had a feeling he was the only one who could stop it. While performing his morning equipment check, Ray discovered the yacht's insurance documentation in a poorly secured file cabinet. His hands trembled slightly as he photographed the papers with his phone. The numbers were staggering. A $50 million life insurance policy on James Turner, with Claire listed as the primary beneficiary and the company, jointly managed by Mark, as the secondary beneficiary. The policy had been updated 3 months ago, shortly before Ray joined the crew. What caught his attention wasn't just the amount, but the unusual set of conditions attached to it. The policy paid double in case of accidents at sea, and there was specific coverage for scenarios that seemed oddly detailed: mechanical failures, navigation system malfunctions, and even food poisoning. Ray carefully replaced the documents, aware that his position aboard the Aurora was becoming increasingly precarious. That afternoon, while James was occupied with video conferences, Ray searched the yacht's bridge for James's personal logbook. He found it hidden behind navigation equipment, its leather cover worn from frequent handling. The entries started normally enough, with routine notes about weather conditions and maintenance schedules. But about 4 months ago, the tone changed. March 15th, Claire insisting on new insurance policy. Mark says it's standard procedure for assets of this size. Something feels off about their urgency. March 28th, second mechanical failure this month. Engineers can't explain it. Need to have systems thoroughly checked. April 2nd, found unknown substances in my private coffee maker. Probably cleaning residue, but ordered a new machine anyway. Claire upset about my paranoia. April 15th, Mark suggesting longer trips away from coast. Claire enthusiastic about idea. Reminder to self, check emergency protocols. The last entry was from just before Ray's hiring, May 1st. Another equipment malfunction. Beginning to think these aren't coincidences. Need someone I can trust aboard. Ray's discovery was interrupted by footsteps approaching the bridge. He quickly returned the logbook and pretended to check whether reports as Claire entered. Still learning the systems, she asked, her smile not matching her watchful eyes. Yes, ma'am. Want to make sure I can handle any situation that comes up. How dedicated, she replied. James was right about you. Always so thorough. After she left, Ray began implementing subtle safety measures. He started taking his own water bottle everywhere, refusing drinks from Claire. He checked James's coffee maker daily and monitored who accessed the bridge during night shifts. He also began keeping his own detailed log, encrypted on his phone, documenting every suspicious interaction and incident. During his off hours, Ray researched Claire and Mark's backgrounds. He discovered they had known each other before Claire met James, though they carefully hid this connection. Local news archives showed them photographed together at charity events dating back 7 years, always maintaining a professional distance in public. The crew, Ray noticed, seemed oblivious to the underlying tensions. To them, Claire was the charming boss's wife who remembered their birthdays, and Mark was the efficient executive who kept the business running. Only Ray saw how Claire's hand lingered on Mark's arm during dinner, or how they exchanged meaningful glances when James was distracted. One evening, while checking the engine room, Ray overheard Mark on the phone. Everything's proceeding according to schedule. The new guy, don't worry about him. He's just a fisherman playing at being important. If he becomes a problem, we'll deal with him. Ray's military training from his youth kicked in. He began planning escape routes, identifying potential weapons disguised as ordinary objects, and memorizing the yacht's layout in detail. He kept his satellite phone charged and hidden, separate from his regular cell phone. The most challenging part was maintaining normalcy around James. The businessman clearly trusted Ray, but remained stubbornly blind to the danger surrounding him. Several times, Ray tried to steer conversations toward the recent accidents or the insurance policy, but James dismissed his concerns with good-natured jokes about Ray's overactive imagination. Late that night, unable to sleep, Ray stood at the yacht's rail watching the moonlit waves. The same waters that had been his livelihood for decades now felt threatening. He thought of Sarah, of her dreams for the future, and knew he couldn't simply walk away. Someone had to protect James, and somehow Ray had become the only person in a position to do so. As if confirming his thoughts, he heard Claire's laugh drifting from the upper deck, followed by Mark's low murmur. Ray silently moved closer, straining to hear their words over the sound of the waves. What he heard made his blood run cold. They were discussing plans for their next port stop, and James's name was mentioned alongside the words, "tragic accident." Ray retreated to his cabin, his mind racing. He now had confirmation of his worst fears. but still lacked the concrete evidence needed to convince James or the authorities. As he lay in his bunk, Ray realized he was caught in a dangerous game where one wrong move could cost not only his job, but possibly his life. The Aurora was 3 days out from port when the first major crisis struck. Ray was checking the navigation systems when warning lights suddenly flooded the control panel. The main engine's temperature spiked dangerously, and the backup systems failed to engage. "We're losing power," the helmsman shouted, frantically working the controls. Ray pushed him aside, his decades of marine experience taking over. He recognized the pattern. Someone had tampered with both the main and backup systems, creating a cascading failure that looked natural. The yacht began to drift in the heavy seas. James rushed to the bridge, his face tight with concern. "What's happening?" "Main engines overheating, sir." "Backups not responding." Ray kept his voice steady while his mind raced through options. He'd secretly studied the yacht systems during his night shifts, preparing for exactly this type of situation. Claire appeared at James's side, her concerned expression perfectly crafted. "Shouldn't we call for help?" she suggested, her hand clutching James's arm. "We're quite far from shore." Ray noticed Mark hovering in the doorway, checking his watch. The timing wasn't lost on Ray. They were in a notorious dead zone for emergency communications, exactly where the shipping routes were most dangerous. "Give me 10 minutes, Ray said, already moving toward the engine room. He'd spotted something during his last inspection, an emergency bypass that wasn't on the official systems diagram. It was risky, but better than drifting helplessly. Working quickly in the hot engine room, Ray rerouted power through the bypass, carefully avoiding the sabotaged systems. The engine coughed, sputtered, then roared back to life. Above, he heard cheers from the crew. When Ray returned to the bridge, Claire was waiting with a drink. "Our hero deserves a celebration," she said, offering him a glass of expensive scotch. "Thank you, ma'am, but I never drink on duty," Ray replied, noting the flash of annoyance in her eyes. Later that evening, Ray's satellite phone buzzed with an incoming video call from Sarah. His daughter's face appeared, her expression worried. "Dad, have you seen the news about the ocean pollution statistics? It's worse than we thought." Ray tried to focus on Sarah's passionate explanation about microplastics and dying coral reefs, but his mind kept returning to the engine failure. "That's great that you're so involved, honey," he said distractedly. Sarah's face fell. "You're not even listening. Ever since you took this job, it's like you're somewhere else. I need your support, Dad. I'm presenting at the environmental conference next month, and I know, sweetheart, and I'm proud of you. Things are just complicated right now. More complicated than the destruction of our oceans, than my future." Sarah's voice cracked. "Mom says you took this job for my college fund, but I'd rather work through school than have you absent when I need you." The guilt hit Ray hard. He was trying to protect James Turner while his own daughter felt abandoned. "Sarah, I promise I'll be there for your presentation, no matter what." After ending the call, Ray stood at the yacht's rail, torn between his growing investigation and his family obligations. The sound of approaching footsteps interrupted his thoughts. It was Mark. "Family troubles?" Mark asked, his tone falsely sympathetic. "Must be hard, balancing this new life with your previous obligations." "Nothing I can't handle," Ray replied carefully. "You know, Ray, loyalty is important in this business." Mark leaned closer, his voice dropping. "But sometimes loyalty to the wrong person can be dangerous. Accidents happen at sea all the time. It would be tragic if your daughter lost her father before her big presentation." The threat was clear. Ray maintained his composure, but his hands gripped the rail tighter. "Thank you for your concern, Mr. Davidson. I always appreciate safety reminders." Mark smiled coldly and walked away, leaving Ray to process the escalation. They were showing their hand more openly now, which meant they were either getting desperate or nearing the end of their plan. That night, Ray couldn't sleep. The engine failure, Claire's attempted drugging, Mark's threat, everything was accelerating. He looked at a photo of Sarah on his phone, her smile bright and determined as she held up a protest sign at an environmental rally. He had to find a way to protect both his family and James, and he was running out of time. Ray opened his encrypted notes app, reviewing his evidence. He had photos of the insurance policy, recordings of suspicious conversations, and detailed logs of the accidents. But he needed something concrete, something that would convince James beyond any doubt. And he needed it before Claire and Mark decided to stop playing games and take direct action. As if underlining his concerns, a new alert appeared on his phone, a weather warning for severe storms approaching their area. Ray checked the yacht's plotted course and felt his stomach tighten. They were heading straight for it, despite several safer alternative routes. Tomorrow would bring not just bad weather, but likely the confrontation he'd been trying to avoid. The Aurora docked at Port Marina Bay for supplies, giving Ray his first chance to meet with his old friend Mike Santos, a retired Coast Guard investigator turned harbor master. They met at a small dockside cafe, away from the yacht's security cameras. "You're not going to like what I found," Mike said, sliding a manila envelope across the table. "Claire Turner. That's not her first marriage to a wealthy man. She was Claire Davidson 8 years ago." Ray's coffee went cold as he examined the documents. "Davidson, as in Mark Davidson's sister? Yeah, they've kept that quiet. Her first husband, Robert Chen, died in a boating accident. Insurance paid out $15 million. Mike leaned forward. "Here's the kicker. The accident was ruled suspicious, but there wasn't enough evidence to prosecute. Claire was seen with an unknown man the night before. The investigation photos are grainy, but..." Ray studied the old surveillance photo. Even with the poor quality, he recognized Mark's distinctive posture. "They've done this before. Gets worse," Mike continued. "I've tracked 6 companies they've been involved with. Each one had a major insurance payout after a partner's death. They're careful, space the incidents years apart, different locations, different methods. But the pattern's there if you know where to look." Through the cafe window, Ray spotted Claire walking along the marina, apparently shopping, but moving with too much purpose. "I'm being watched," he muttered. Mike nodded slightly. "Take this burner phone. I've got a contact in insurance fraud investigation who'd be very interested in." "There you are." Claire's voice cut through the conversation as she approached their table. "James was looking for you, Ray." "And who's your friend?" Mike smoothly transitioned into his harbor master role, discussing docking fees and weather reports, while Ray carefully pocketed the envelope and phone. Claire's eyes missed nothing, her smile growing tighter. Back on the yacht, Ray found James in his study. Before he could speak, Claire appeared. "Darling, remember that charity gala tonight? We should start getting ready." "Right, of course." James turned to Ray. "We'll catch up tomorrow." Claire's passionate about this marine conservation group. "Actually, your daughter might be interested." "Sarah, right?" Claire mentioned she's an environmental activist. Ray felt a chill. They'd been researching his family. "Yes, sir. She's very dedicated." "We should sponsor her work," Claire suggested, her tone honey-sweet. "Perhaps invite her aboard for a few days. I'm sure she'd love to see what her father does." The threat was subtle but clear. Ray maintained his composure. "That's very kind, but she's busy with school." That evening, while the others attended the gala, Ray used the opportunity to investigate Claire's cabin. In her desk, he found a hidden compartment containing offshore account documents and a series of letters between her and Mark dating back years. Their real relationship was documented in black and white, along with hints of their previous schemes. A noise in the corridor forced Ray to quickly replace everything. He barely made it out before Claire returned unexpectedly. She was alone, having left the gala early, looking for something. She asked, startling him in the hallway. "Just finishing my security rounds, ma'am. How thorough of you." Claire stepped closer. "You know, Ray, I admired how you handled the engine crisis. Someone with your skills could be very valuable to the right people. I'm not sure I follow." "Don't play naive. You're smarter than that. She touched his arm. There's room for one more in our arrangement. The insurance policy is quite generous. Ray, careful, shifted away. I should check the weather reports. Storm coming in. Think about it, Claire called after him. Some offers only come once, and some people can't be protected forever. Not James, not your daughter. Ray spent the night reviewing the documents from Mike. The pattern was clear. Claire and Mark had refined their technique over years. They gained trust, arranged accidents, collected insurance, and vanished. The yacht's upcoming cruise would take them through notoriously dangerous waters, perfect for staging another accident. Using the burner phone, Ray contacted Mike's insurance fraud investigator, but as he detailed the evidence, another alert caught his eye. Sarah had posted about attending a protest near the marina tomorrow. The timing couldn't be worse. If Claire was researching his family, Sarah could already be in danger. Ray ended the call and tried to reach his daughter, but her phone went straight to voicemail. Through the yacht's windows, he could see Claire and Mark in an intense discussion on the upper deck. They kept looking toward the marina, where environmental protesters were already gathering for tomorrow's demonstration. The pieces were falling into place faster than Ray could handle. He had evidence of their past crimes, but not their current plans. His daughter was potentially in danger, and somewhere in the marina, insurance investigators were quietly gathering proof of a pattern that stretched back years. Tomorrow's protest would bring everything to a head. His daughter's passion for the environment, Claire and Mark's deadly plans, and Ray's desperate attempt to prevent another tragedy. As the storm clouds gathered on the horizon, Ray realized he was running out of both time and options. The morning brought chaos to Port Marina Bay as environmental protesters gathered, their signs visible from the Aurora's deck. Ray's attention, however, was focused on a tiny black device he'd just discovered behind a panel in James's private office. The listening device was professional grade, recently installed, with a direct feed to somewhere else on the yacht. Ray traced the wiring carefully, following it through the yacht's maintenance tunnel. The feed led to a sophisticated receiver hidden in Mark's quarters, connected to a laptop with encrypted files. Ray photographed everything with his phone, careful not to disturb the setup. This was the evidence he needed. Proof of active surveillance of James. A message from Sarah interrupted his documentation. Dad, big news. Speaking at today's protest, Claire Turner herself invited me. Isn't that your boss's wife? She's sponsoring our coalition. Ray's hands went cold. Claire was making her move, using Sarah to apply pressure. He quickly typed back, "Stay away from the marina. Call me immediately." "Captain," James's voice made Ray jump. He was standing in the office doorway, looking confused. "What are you doing in here?" Ray held up the listening device. "Sir, we need to talk. Privately, and not here." James's expression shifted from confusion to annoyance. "If this is about the engine malfunction, it's about your wife and Mark, and this." Ray showed him the device. "They're monitoring your conversations. I have proof they've done this before. 2 other wealthy men who died in accidents at sea." James shook his head. "That's ridiculous. Claire and Mark have run my business for years. Why would they? The insurance policy, sir. 50 million, double for accidents at sea. And their siblings, not just business partners. They've done this before, to Robert Chen and others. Siblings." James laughed, but there was uncertainty in his eyes. "That's impossible. I've known them both for less time than they've known each other." Ray interrupted, pulling out the documents Mike had given him. "Please, just look at these photos, these records." James began reviewing the papers, his face growing darker. These could be faked. Claire would never. A noise in the hallway made them both freeze. Through the partially open door, they saw Claire walking past, phone to her ear. "Yes, everything's set for tomorrow's cruise. The weather will be perfect for our purposes." James stared after her, something finally shifting in his expression. "The insurance paperwork," he said slowly. "Show me what you found." Ray quickly outlined everything: the pattern of deaths, the offshore accounts, the connection between Claire and Mark. James sank into his chair, looking suddenly older. "The speedboat accident," James said. "The one where you saved me. That wasn't an accident, was it?" "No, sir, I don't believe it was." James pressed a button under his desk, activating a hidden safe. He pulled out a file. "I've been keeping my own records. Things that didn't add up. The missing maintenance logs, the changed security codes, the unexplained transfers. I just didn't want to believe." A shadow appeared in the doorway. Mark stood there, his usual smooth composure cracked by anger. "James, there you are. Claire's been looking for you. We need to discuss tomorrow's departure schedule." James met Ray's eyes briefly before turning to Mark. "Of course, just reviewing some security concerns with Ray here." "Security concerns?" Mark's hand moved toward his jacket pocket. "Anything I should know about?" "Just routine checks," Ray said calmly, noting the slight bulge in Mark's jacket. "A weapon. Weather's looking rough tomorrow. All the more reason to finalize our plans." Mark's smile was tight. "James, shall we?" James stood, subtly pocketing some of the documents Ray had brought. "Lead the way." After they left, Ray immediately checked his phone. Still no response from Sarah. Through the window, he could see the environmental protest growing larger. Somewhere in that crowd was his daughter, unwittingly being drawn into Claire's web. Ray's satellite phone buzzed. A message from Mike: "Insurance investigators ready. Need 24 hours to position teams. Keep them on the yacht." But Ray knew they didn't have 24 hours. Claire and Mark's plans were accelerating. They'd seen him with James in the office, discovered their surveillance was compromised. They wouldn't wait. Another alert. A weather service warning about the approaching storm, now upgraded to potentially dangerous levels. The perfect cover for an accident. Ray looked at the listening device in his hand, then at the protest below. His daughter was down there somewhere, being used as leverage. James was with Mark, possibly walking into a trap, and Claire was still unaccounted for. The time for careful investigation was over. Tomorrow's cruise would be deadly unless Ray acted now. But with Sarah in potential danger and James still not fully convinced, his options were running out. He needed to find a way to protect everyone and expose Claire and Mark before they could put their final plan into action. As if to emphasize the urgency, thunder rolled in the distance. The storm was coming faster than predicted, and with it, Ray feared, would come Claire and Mark's endgame. Thunder cracked overhead as Ray made his way to the engine room, checking the yacht systems one last time before the storm hit. The protest crowds had dispersed due to the weather, but Sarah hadn't responded to any of his messages. His tension mounted with each passing minute. Mark's voice cut through the engine noise. "Quite dedicated, aren't you? Checking everything personally, taking notes, asking questions." He stepped from behind a bulkhead, blocking Ray's exit. "Almost like you don't trust the professional maintenance crew." "Just doing my job, Mr. Davison. Or should I say, Ms. Turner's brother." Mark's composed facade cracked slightly. "You've been digging where you shouldn't, Ray. First that harbor master friend of yours, now spreading lies to James. It stops now, like Robert Chen stopped." Ray kept his stance relaxed, but ready, or the others before him. Accidents happen at sea. Mark moved closer, his expensive suit incongruous in the industrial setting, especially to people who don't know their place. "How's Sarah, by the way?" Claire mentioned she's quite passionate about environmental causes. Would be a shame if something happened during one of those protests. Ray's fists clenched. "Leave my daughter out of this. That's up to you. Claire's taken quite a liking to you. You know, she thinks you could be useful." Mark's smile was cold. "Better to be on the winning side, Ray. The insurance payout would set Sarah up for life. Is that what you told Chun's crew before they went down with the ship?" Mark's hand moved toward his jacket, but Ray was faster. Years of handling heavy fishing equipment had kept him stronger than he looked. He grabbed Mark's wrist, twisted twisting until a small pistol clattered to the floor. "That's assault," Mark snarled, jerking away. "Your word against mine, and who do you think they'll believe? The respected businessman or the hired help? Depends on what's on the recording." Ray held up his phone. Mark's face went pale. "Now, about that maintenance crew you mentioned." Before Mark could respond, an alarm blared through the yacht. The storm had arrived ahead of schedule, and with it, high waves that rocked the Aurora against its moorings. Ray used the distraction to slip past Mark, scooping up the dropped pistol as he went. He needed to find James, to get Sarah to safety, but first he had to secure the evidence he'd gathered. He rushed to his cabin, only to find Claire waiting inside. She'd changed into an elegant evening dress, a contrast to the storm raging outside. Looking for these, she held up the manila envelope of evidence. Amazing what people leave lying around. "Mrs. Turner, please, call me Claire." She stepped closer, her perfume mixing with the smell of rain through the open window. "You know, Ray, you've impressed me. Most people never notice the details, ask the right questions. You're different. Where's Sarah? Safe, for now. She's quite talented, your daughter. Such passion for environmental causes." Claire's smile was predatory. "Our foundation could fund her work, send her to the best schools. All it would take is your cooperation. Like Robert Chen's crew cooperated. Accidents happen." She moved closer still. "But they don't have to. You could be part of this, Ray. No more struggling to make ends meet. No more choosing between work and family." Her hand touched his chest. "All you have to do is look the other way tomorrow. One simple choice." Ray stayed perfectly still, and James made his fortune exploiting the seas you love. Think of the good we could do with that money. Environmental programs, marine conservation. Her lips were inches from his. Sarah could be part of something meaningful. A crash of thunder punctuated her words. Ray noticed her other hand sliding toward a nearby drawer. Inside, he knew, would be another weapon, another trap. "You're right about one thing," he said softly. "I do notice details, like how you palm his heart medication, replacing it with placebos, how you've been slowly poisoning his food, the ways you make accidents look natural." Claire's seductive smile vanished. "Prove it." "Already have." Ray held up his phone, showing the screen. "Been recording since you walked in, and broadcasting to a secure server." Claire's expression turned vicious. She yanked open the drawer, but Ray was already moving. He grabbed her wrist as she pulled out a syringe, forcing it from her grip. They struggled, the yacht rolling beneath them in the strengthening storm. "It's over," Ray said, holding her back. "The insurance investigators have everything they need." "You think you've won?" Claire laughed, a harsh sound. "Mark's with James right now, finalizing tomorrow's voyage. One way or another, there will be an accident. And now, thanks to your meddling, Sarah might have one too." The yacht's intercom crackled. "All hands, secure stations. Storm warnings upgraded to severe. Captain to the bridge immediately." Ray maintained his grip on Claire while reaching for his satellite phone. He had to warn someone about Sarah, had to stop whatever Mark was planning. But as lightning illuminated the cabin, he saw Claire's smile widen. "Tick-tock, Ray," she whispered. "What's it going to be? Your daughter or your employer? You can't save them both." The yacht pitched violently in the growing storm as Ray made his decision. He secured Claire with cable ties he'd kept ready in his pocket, ignoring her threats and struggling. Using the ship's internal phone, he called the engine room crew to his cabin. "Security breach. Watch her. She doesn't leave." The maintenance crew, loyal to James rather than Mark, quickly took control of the situation. Claire's composed facade finally cracked. "You have no idea what you're dealing with," she snarled. "Mark's already what?" Ray pulled out the burner phone Mike had given him. "Tell me where Sarah is." Lightning flashed outside as Claire laughed. "You're out of your depth, Fisherman. The storm's getting worse. Perfect weather for accidents, don't you think?" Ray left her under guard and moved quickly through the yacht, his mind racing. He needed to get concrete evidence of their plans, but he also needed to find Sarah and protect James. Time was running out on all fronts. He made his way to the yacht's communication center, where he'd earlier planted a small recording device. The storm interference would provide cover for what he was about to do. Using his maintenance codes, he accessed the yacht's internal communication system. The recording setup was simple but effective, patched directly into the yacht's internal network. If Mark was going to make his move, he'd need to coordinate with their collaborators. Ray just had to wait and monitor. He didn't have to wait long. Through the headphones, he heard Mark's voice. Everything's set for departure. James signed the final clearance. Once we're past the harbor markers, static interrupted the transmission. Ray adjusted the frequencies, heart pounding. Mark's voice came back. Claire secured the chemicals. Engine failure in rough seas. Perfectly natural. Make sure the rescue response is delayed by at least more static. A text message flashed on Ray's phone from Sarah. Dad, something weird. Claire's foundation people took my phone earlier, just got it back. They're acting strange. I'm at the marina office with the protest organizers. Ray typed quickly. Get out now. Go to Mike at Harbor Master's office. Don't tell anyone. Another voice crackled through the headphones. One of Mark's hired men. Turner's daughter is at the marina. Should we proceed with, stick to the plan? Mark interrupted. She's our insurance. Ray steps out of line. She has an accident. Simple as that. Now, about tomorrow's departure, Ray recorded everything, his hands steady despite his racing heart. Through the yacht's windows, he could see movement on the dock despite the storm. Men positioning themselves, watching the exits. His phone buzzed again. Sarah, Dad, locked in marina office. Men outside. What's happening? Before Ray could respond, the yacht's intercom crackled. All hands. Emergency meeting in the main salon. Immediate attendance required. It was Mark's voice, and Ray knew it was a trap, but it might be his only chance to get enough evidence to convince James once and for all. He checked his recording device one last time, making sure everything was backing up to the secure server Mike had set up. Moving carefully through the yacht's corridors, Ray approached the main salon. He could hear Mark's voice inside, talking to James about departure plans. Ray pressed his phone to the door, recording. The weather forecast is perfect, Mark was saying. Once we're past the markers, the accident will look completely natural, just like Chun's did. What did you say? James's voice was sharp. I said the weather is perfect for you. Mention Chun, Robert Chen. James's voice had changed. Ray was right about you. Ray heard movement inside. A scuffle, a crash. He burst through the door to find Mark holding a gun on James. Right on time, Mark smiled, closed the door. Instead, Ray held up his phone. Everything's recorded. Your conversation about Chen, the chemicals, Sarah, all of it. Already uploaded to multiple servers. Mark's smile faltered slightly. Doesn't matter. In this storm, so many things can go wrong. Signals lost. Evidence corrupted. People disappeared. Like the evidence you planted in the engine room. The sabotaged backup systems. The poison in James's meals. Ray kept his voice steady. The insurance investigators have it all. Thunder crashed overhead as Mark's composure finally cracked. You're bluffing. No one could have your sister talked. Ray lied smoothly. Claire's very cooperative when her own freedom's at stake. The gun in Mark's hand wavered. Outside, lightning illuminated multiple boats approaching the Aurora despite the storm. Coast Guard vessels responding to Mike's signal. But Ray knew they wouldn't arrive in time to prevent what was coming. Mark was cornered, armed, and had nothing left to lose. The next few moments would determine whether anyone walked out of this room alive. Through the yacht's windows, Ray caught a glimpse of movement on the dock. Sarah, running toward Mike's office through the rain. At least she was safe. Now he just had to deal with the immediate threat in front of him. As the storm raged and the evidence of years of carefully planned murders sat recorded on his phone, Mark's finger tightened on the trigger. You know what happens next, don't you, Ray? Yeah, Ray replied calmly. I do. His hand moved toward his pocket, where he'd stashed one final piece of evidence, and one last chance to end this before it turned deadly. The salon's elegant furnishings contrasted sharply with the tableau of violence they framed. Mark holding his gun, James backed against his desk, and Ray standing between them. Outside, the storm thrashed the yacht against its moorings. Drop the phone, Mark ordered, his weapon steady. Now, Ray complied, but as the phone clattered to the floor, he pressed a hidden button on his watch, another recording device, synchronized with the yacht's security systems. Everything happening in this room was being captured from multiple angles. You know what's interesting about insurance fraud? Ray said conversationally, drawing Mark's attention. The paperwork, like how you filed Claire's policy under her maiden name, Davidson, same as Robert Chen's case. James's eyes widened at this confirmation. All this time, shut up. Mark's composure was cracking. You have no idea what we've built, what we've sacrificed. Years of planning, perfect executions. Then some fisherman starts playing detective. Ray kept talking, buying time, as he heard distant sirens through the storm. Must have been frustrating. Claire tells me you've planned the speedboat accident for months. Didn't expect a random fisherman to be nearby. A mistake we won't repeat. Mark's finger tightened on the trigger. James, move away from the desk. But James stood his ground. My own wife, my trusted partner. How many others? 8. Ray answered for Mark. 8 accidents in 12 years. All with massive insurance payouts. All with Claire playing the grieving widow or partner. All with you in the background, handling the paperwork. Lightning flashed, illuminating Mark's face as he processed Ray's words. How did you? Your sister talks in her sleep, Ray bluffed. The crew's quarters carry sound surprisingly well, especially when someone's having guilty nightmares about Robert Chen. This was the gambit. Ray had seen Claire taking sleeping pills, had heard her muttering in her cabin. He was betting everything on Mark's protective instinct toward his sister. It worked. Mark's attention shifted slightly, concern for Claire breaking through his calculated exterior. Where is she? What did you do to her? That moment of distraction was all Ray needed. He lunged forward, years of wrestling with fishing nets giving him unexpected speed. The gun went off, the shot going wide as they struggled. James moved with surprising agility, grabbing a heavy paperweight from his desk. Through the yacht's windows, Coast Guard lights became visible through the storm. Mark saw them too, his desperation increasing. It's not over, he snarled, fighting for control of the weapon. Claire has contingencies. Your daughter is safe, Ray grunted, keeping his grip firm. Your men at the marina are already in custody. Check your phone, if you can reach it. Mark's free hand had been inching toward his jacket pocket, likely reaching for a phone to trigger some planned disaster. The revelation that his backup plan was compromised made him hesitate. That hesitation proved costly. James brought the paperweight down on Mark's wrist. The gun skidded across the floor as Mark howled in pain. Ray quickly subdued him, using the same cable ties he'd used on Claire. James, the evidence is in the safe behind the Monet. Everything you need to prove the conspiracy, you knew. Mark spat blood from his split lip. You knew where it all was. I knew you'd keep copies, Ray replied, securing the bonds. Insurance against Claire betraying you, just like she kept insurance against you. Siblings shouldn't keep secrets from each other. Through the yacht's intercom, they heard commotion. Coast Guard officers boarding, Claire's angry shouts as she was discovered. The storm was beginning to abate, as if nature itself had decided the drama was ending. Ray's phone buzzed. A message from Sarah. Safe with Mike. Coast Guard everywhere. Dad, what's happening? Before he could reply, James spoke quietly. I trusted them completely. Let them handle everything. Finances, insurance, crew hiring. Never questioned. That's how they operated, Ray explained. Keeping pressure on Mark's restraints. Build trust, create dependence, then exploit it. The perfect long con. Why didn't they just kill me that day on the speedboat? Why this elaborate plan? Ray met James's eyes. Because of the insurance policy's suicide clause. They needed it to look like an accident at sea. Clean, natural, no questions asked, just like all the others. Mark laughed bitterly. You understand nothing. We had a vision. The money would have funded. Save it for the prosecutors. Ray cut him off as Coast Guard officers burst into the salon. I'm sure they'll be very interested in your vision and all those other accidents over the years. As Mark was led away, James turned to Ray. How long did you know about everything? Suspected from the start, Ray admitted. The speedboat accident was too perfect. Then Claire's act. Grieving wife one moment, calculating businesswoman the next. But knowing isn't the same as proving. And now, Ray held up his watch. Now we have Mark's confession, Claire's recorded conversations, the evidence from their previous crimes, and he walked to the desk and pressed a hidden switch, revealing a small camera, James Turner's own investigation files. You weren't as trusting as they thought, were you? James managed a weak smile. Perhaps we're both better at keeping secrets than they expected. Through the windows, they could see Claire being led to a Coast Guard vessel, her perfect composure finally shattered. The storm had passed, leaving behind a sky beginning to clear. Ray's phone buzzed again. Sarah, sending a photo of herself with Mike at the harbor master's office, safe and sound. The long game was finally over. But Ray knew the real challenges were just beginning. Explanations to be made, evidence to be processed, and a daughter who deserved to know why her father had really taken this job on the Aurora. You know, James said quietly, I still have a yacht that needs a captain I can trust. Ray looked at his phone, at Sarah's smiling face, then out at the clearing sky. Let's talk about that after we deal with the insurance investigators. And maybe after I take my daughter to her environmental conference. The sound of sirens and official voices filled the yacht as dawn began to break over the harbor, marking the end of one story and the beginning of another. 2 weeks after the arrests of Claire and Mark, Ray sat in James's office aboard the Aurora, now docked at a different marina. The yacht had been thoroughly searched by investigators, yielding even more evidence of the siblings' previous crimes. The insurance investigators want to speak with you again, Ray said, placing a folder on James's desk. They've linked Claire and Mark to 3 more suspicious deaths in Europe. James nodded, surprisingly composed for a man whose life had been recently appended. 11 victims total. All that time, right under my nose. He opened his laptop, displaying financial records. Or perhaps not as under my nose as they thought. Ray leaned forward, suddenly alert. Sir, you're not the only one who can play a long game, Ray. James turned the laptop around. 2 years ago, I began noticing discrepancies in our company's insurance policies. Small things at first. Changed beneficiaries, altered terms. Then I discovered Claire's connection to Robert Chen. You knew. Ray's mind raced, reassessing every interaction of the past months. I knew something was wrong. But Claire and Mark were careful, patient. I needed proof, and more importantly, I needed someone they wouldn't suspect. James smiled. Enter a humble fisherman, happening to be in the right place at the right time during my accident. The pieces clicked into place. The speedboat malfunction, you staged it. With the help of the Coast Guard and your friend Mike, we needed someone with your background. Smart, observant, but appearing unthreatening. Someone they might try to recruit rather than eliminate immediately. Ray thought back to that morning in the fog, the perfectly timed distress call, Mike's convenient appearance as harbor master, Sarah's environmental activism, a fortunate coincidence that gave you additional credibility. Claire and Mark's research would show you had genuine financial pressures, a talented daughter needing college funding, the perfect target for their manipulation. All this time, Ray said slowly, I thought I was investigating them, but you were investigating all of us. I needed to be certain, Ray, about them and about you. Each time you discovered something, reported something, refused their bribes, you proved yourself trustworthy. Lightning flashed outside, reminiscent of that climactic night. The confession we recorded, essential evidence. My own investigation had hit walls. We needed them to incriminate themselves directly. James stood, walking to the window. The Coast Guard has been building this case for months. Your friend Mike coordinated everything. Ray processed this revelation, feeling a complex mix of emotions. Why tell me now? Because the yacht needs a new captain. James turned back to face him. Someone who can't be bought, who notices details, who puts safety and integrity first. The salary would more than cover Sarah's college expenses. Legitimately this time. As if on cue, Ray's phone buzzed. A message from Sarah about her upcoming environmental conference speech. She was investigating corporate impact on marine ecosystems, now with funding from James's legitimate charitable foundation. The official story, James continued, is exactly what happened. You discovered their plot, gathered evidence, and stopped them. Your reputation as a hero will help rebuild trust in the company. The deeper operation remains classified, and the other victims' families will receive full compensation from the recovered funds. Claire and Mark hid millions in offshore accounts. That money will go to the families they destroyed. Ray stood, looking out at the marina where this had all begun. You took quite a risk, sir. What if you'd been wrong about me? The same risk you took believing in your suspicions about them. James handed him a captain's insignia. Sometimes you have to trust your instincts. The office door opened, and Sarah entered, her conference badge hanging round her neck. Dad, Mr. Turner, you have to see this. We just got the satellite data showing illegal dumping by one of your competitors' ships. James smiled. Perhaps the new captain of the Aurora could help investigate. Ray took the insignia, feeling its weight. I suppose someone needs to keep an eye on things at sea. He turned to his daughter. Want to help your old man patrol for environmental violations? Sarah's eyes lit up. Really, Dad, that's perfect. I can document everything from my research. As they left the office, Ray glanced back at James, who nodded slightly. The game was over, but another was just beginning. This time, though, they were all on the same side. Thunder rolled in the distance as the Aurora's new captain began planning his first official voyage. There would be other conspiracies to uncover, other wrongs to right. But for now, Ray Mitchell, former fisherman and reluctant hero, had everything he'd ever wanted: a purpose, a future for his daughter, and the truth finally brought to light.